Hey, it's Sam. In this video, I'm going to discuss a few really important things that have to do with discussing astrology. What is astrology? What's the difference between belief and knowledge? And try to unravel some of these things and kind of unpack the conceptual part of astrology and bring it down into something that's more tangible that you can explain and that you can talk about and that you can understand for yourself in a way that's more empowering. You know, so many times people tell me, students or other people that, they say, I understand what you're talking about, I just can't put it into words the way you do. And there's this illusion that they say, I understand what you're saying, but I just can't put it into words. And I need to just say right away that if you can't put something into words, then you don't really understand it. And there's this whole kind of illusion of knowledge going on in the world, and astrology is big in that. We gather a lot of information which is related to Mercury, and we haven't really connected it though with the higher picture and turned it into knowledge, which is Jupiter. This Mercury-Jupiter crossover is really important in astrology. But the thing to understand is when you go to talk to people about astrology, this is also the reason why when you do go to speak to people about astrology, you wind up tongue-tied. It's not just that you can't explain astrological things like you hear me explain, like why Saturn going over the moon does a certain thing. You hear me explain it and you're like, oh, I get that. I understand that. But then if you try to explain it, you can't bring it out that way. The reason is because you don't understand it as well as you think you understand it. You're just hearing me speak to deeper wisdom that we all have, and you understand that. But what happens is when you try, there's a disconnect between what you think you know astrology, but you actually just believe in astrology. Astrology is a belief system for you. I'll tell you right now, I don't believe in astrology. It's not a belief for me. Any more than I don't believe in yoga, or I don't believe in my hand. These aren't beliefs, these are facts. I practice yoga. I see my hand. They're experiences. Just like with astrology. I practice astrology. I see it working. I use it like I use my hand, or like I do yoga. When you have an experiential relationship with something, then it's not a belief. And this is the difference between belief and knowledge. Again, there's a disconnect. The reason you can't explain it is because you don't understand it. You don't understand what it is. And the only way to understand what it is to actually practice it and learn it. This is why I teach astrology. And I teach it to people at all levels, and I have a certification program coming up that starts from the beginning and walks people through so they can actually learn it. Like we learn any other subject. It's not too complicated. We can learn any subject. Like you've seen me say, we're all supposed to know this. So think of something that you do know really well, something that you've studied. It's very simple. You went to college, or you've studied something maybe, related to your job, and try to explain that to someone who doesn't know anything about it. In a few quick words, you can basically explain what this thing is. Because you do it. And again, the difference between belief and knowledge is vast. Belief is based on something that we don't yet know, but we have to believe in. Like, for instance, I said, our hand is not a belief. Yoga is not a belief. These are practices and experiences. But something like, the idea that one day it'll all get better, that's a belief. Because you don't know. Something about the future, or, something that inspires you, some information that inspires you, information, Mercury, that inspires you, Jupiter. This is what astrology is to most people. So when they try to explain it to someone, they get all kind of mixed up between what do I know and what do I just believe. And so they get into this whole thing that feels very ungrounded. So I'm going to explain, a little bit more about how you can explain astrology to people in a way that makes sense, rather than just some kind of abstract, sort of confusing thing. Because honestly, from my point of view, people that, it's just as damaging at times. The folks who think they know what astrology is, or who believe in it, and then they take this really convoluted explanation to everybody in their life who doesn't really know what it is, and all these people are like, well, based on that, I definitely don't want anything to do with it. Your explanations might actually be hurting your cause a little bit. So, when you approach someone about astrology, the things to understand, it's actually very simple. Astrology is based on astronomy, the sacred astronomy first. You can start with the physical. You've heard me talk about the three gunas and the three states of existence. Physical, emotional, spiritual, or abstract, you might say. So you can start by understanding astrology as a sort of sacred astronomy. And by the way, if astrologers don't understand this astronomical reality, they're usually not very good astrologers. And I don't just mean how fast the planets move and all that. I mean the mystical implications of the astronomy, the sacred astronomy. I've done a lot of teaching on this. I'm not going to get into the whole thing here, but there's a whole kind of sacred esoteric mysticism in Indian cosmology and teaching that revolves around the number 108. And this is a ratio between the sun, moon, and earth. If you've never heard me talk about this, I'll just explain it. You can fit 108 suns between us and the sun and 108 moons between us and the moon. And this sacred vibration took 4.5 billion years to happen. Even obviously on a physical level, you can see the esoteric implications of astrology. It took 4.5 billion years for sun, moon, and earth to work into this sacred vibration to where consciousness has evolved on earth. Now this is between the sun, moon, and earth. This is why these are the three luminaries. The sun is the Paramatman, the Supreme Self. The moon is the mind, or the Jiva Atman, that goes with us from lifetime to lifetime. And the earth is the physical body. So these are the three main components of how our consciousness evolves. And then the other planets are the different faculties of consciousness as well. All of the planets, the entire solar system has been there 4.5 billion years, but it took literally 4.5 billion years for them to work into this sacred vibration to where we have consciousness like we have now. And so this is the origin of astrological, mystical, energetic workings. It starts with this sacred astronomy. It's a miracle. If you look up at the sun and the moon, they look exactly the same size from where we are. It wasn't always like that. So you can say and understand that astrology has a foundation in sacred astronomy. And we're on an evolutionary path. The great Saint Sri Yukteswar tied together the inner and the outer zodiacs, the inner chakra system with the outer zodiac. What happens is, through planetary motions, our karmas activate based on our karmic DNA and karmic relationship with each of these planets. It's like the planets are like multiple timepieces, all sort of running independent of each other, and then syncing up with our inner environment, like based on our birth chart, which is our karmic patterning. Then as the planets move through the sky, these little, these sacred timepieces match up with our inner environment, and then they also match up with each other, and then they also match up with where our karmas are unfolding based on like the dashas. And all of these things come together and produce results that put us in a situation to where we're challenged to grow and evolve. Life on earth is not just about trying to get good stuff and all that. It's about the soul evolving. And astrology is the science that allows us to see what the soul is learning at any given time based on the scientific, energetic, spiritual principles of the planets that have been around billions of years. The thing, you need to understand something. The planets are not just these rocks moving around. This is one of the big disconnects that people have. And this is something that I had a problem with. Well, how does these big rocks moving around have to do with me? Well, they're not big rocks moving around any more than you're just a hunk of meat walking around. These are beings that have been around 4.5 billion years. Imagine if you were that old. Study the planets once. Study how amazing they are. They're incredible. Saturn is a gigantic planet, and it would actually float on the surface of a bathtub. It's kind of crazy. I mean, it's amazing. All the planets are incredible beings. They look a certain way, but that doesn't mean that that's all they are. They're not just big rocks moving around. It's like we have no imagination anymore. Just like you're not just a hunk of meat walking around, they're not just big rocks. They're beings. Everything is a being. I mean, it's funny because people will acknowledge like the existence of like a spirit or soul in a tree or a frog or a dog. But something like the planets that have been around billions of years, it's like, they're just these big dumb rocks. So, I'm trying to give you a context here to elevate your perception. And really have this sink in so that when you speak to people about it, you can maybe say something very simple like, well, astrology is a system that allows us to understand our life on Earth and why things are unfolding as our consciousness unfolds. And the planets are these beings that have been around billions of years in this sacred astronomical vibration lined up and produced consciousness and karma and beings to evolve. And astrology is the study of that, the study of our place as an individual within the cosmic design. And so, this is a way for you to understand and frame astrology in a way that makes sense not only to others but to you first. And like I said, one of the main things I wanted to get out of this video is to make you aware of the fact that the reason you have a hard time explaining it is because you don't understand it. Like everything else you understand, you can explain things you understand very well. Things that you have experienced. So when you see something astrological and you have this illusion of understanding where you're like, okay, well, Venus is exalted but it's retrograde and it's aspected by Saturn, so what does that mean? And in your mind you have this illusion, well, I understand what Venus is, what exalted is, what retrograde is, what aspected by Saturn is, I know all of that, but what does it mean? And from my point of view, I'm just looking at like 5 illusions of knowledge stacked one on top of the other. And someone asking me, like, because if I ask them, they'd be like, well, I know what Venus is, and we approach something like astrology with this mindset that we're trying to like figure it out and, say to ourselves, okay, I get what that is, before we've actually understood what it means. And so students usually pile all of this complexity or this illusion of understanding one on top of the next and then wonder why they're more confused than if they just studied one thing at a time. If you just understood what Venus was and what Pisces is, which is where it's exalted, it would tell you a heck of a lot more than getting a couple little pieces of information and gathering them and then thinking you know something. So I'm not trying to be insulting, but in order to really understand astrology, like I say, we're meant to understand this. We're meant to understand astrology. We're meant to study it and learn it, like we're meant to learn all of these sacred life sciences. But to understand it properly and to learn it properly, you start to unravel and unpack all of these things. And it's based on these classic Vedic archetypes which teach you about life in general, not just about astrology. And by the way, not just about your astrology, because this is the other thing. People just start studying, they obsess over their chart and have no discrimination. Again, you start learning about these universal principles of life, at least the way I teach it in my certification program. And then you start to migrate those things into these gigantic concepts like planet signs, houses, karma, universal divine energies. And then it starts to become something that you begin to actually practice it. And you begin to actually know it. There's really no way to do that. There's no way to really know astrology unless you study it properly. Most people have a hard time doing that on their own. This is why people like me come and set up programs to teach you. So that's the other part too. And again, I am starting a certification program here real soon. And you want to really look into that to kind of bust out of this illusion of knowledge and hopefully be able to explain astrology to people in your life in a way that's really worthy of your love for it and worthy of astrology itself. Because frankly, if you give people these convoluted explanations and stuff, you're not really helping, I'm sorry to say, because it just makes it sound like some weird belief, and people say all kinds of stuff that just that makes others go, well, I don't know about all that. So, let me know what you think of this, and thanks for listening.